Emily had grown up in a world that seemed big for everyone else but small for her. For while her father's mansion stretched wide with glittering windows, gardens full of roses, and marble floors that echoed under heavy steps, her own world was the size of a wheelchair, the only place she had ever known since birth, a seat that kept her trapped while life moved freely all around her. And even though her father, a billionaire with endless resources, brought the best doctors, the most advanced machines, and therapists who spoke in hopeful tones, nothing had ever changed because Emily's legs had never carried her even one single step. And as the years passed, hope turned into silence, and silence turned into loneliness. For her father was always away handling businesses, meetings, and empires, leaving Emily with nurses and staff who cared for her but never truly understood her heart. And every time she stared out of her window watching children run in the garden, she felt as if a glass wall separated her from the world, a wall too high to climb. And this silence weighed on her like a shadow that followed her everywhere. Until one morning when the household staff announced that a new maid had been hired, a woman named Rosa, who walked into the mansion with quiet dignity, her skin glowing under the morning light, her hands rough from years of hard work, her eyes carrying a strength that came from struggles nobody spoke of. And though at first Emily assumed she would be just another face who would speak politely, but keep a distance like the others, something about Rosa felt different. For when she entered Emily's room, she did not stare at the wheelchair with pity, nor did she rush to adjust blankets or trays like the nurses did. Instead, she simply smiled and said good morning, as if she were meeting any other girl her age. And in that small gesture, Emily felt something she had not felt in years, a sense of being seen as herself, and not as her weakness. Yet beneath that moment lay an air of mystery, because Rosa was unlike the rest of the staff, who often whispered about her past, but never asked questions directly. And Emily, who had always lived surrounded by silence, found herself drawn toward this new presence who seemed to carry both secrets and light within her. And as days went by, Emily started noticing how Rosa hummed while cleaning, how she spoke kindly to everyone regardless of their status, and how she lingered a little longer in Emily's room, sometimes telling her simple stories of faraway places or of struggles overcome with patience. And even though Emily tried to hide her curiosity, she listened with growing interest. For every story Rosa shared seemed to hold more than words, almost as if lessons were hidden between the lines. But what Emily did not know was that Rosa had once faced a battle of her own, one that had left her broken and told by doctors that her body would never heal. Yet here she stood, strong and steady, carrying herself with resilience that no one could see at first glance. And while Emily's father remained distant, buried in his empire of numbers and decisions, Rosa quietly filled the gaps of silence in Emily's life, not by forcing her to forget her pain, but by reminding her, without even saying it, that life had meaning even when everything felt impossible. And one night, when Emily lay awake staring at the ceiling, she wondered why Rosa never looked at her as someone helpless, why she never sighed in frustration or spoke in tones of pity. And this thought began to stir something inside Emily, something that felt like a question she had never dared to ask. What if her story wasn't finished yet? What if beyond the silence there was still something waiting for her? And though the house remained grand and empty with echoes of wealth in every corner, for the first time Emily's world felt like it was about to expand, though she could not explain why. And with each passing day, Rosa's presence became a gentle light, a reminder that perhaps her silent world was not as unchanging as she had believed. And though Emily did not know it yet, the moment she looked deeper into Rosa's eyes and saw the strength hidden there would become the beginning of everything she had always dreamed of but never dared to believe. A chance to step into a life beyond the walls of her wheelchair, a chance to break the silence that had held her prisoner for so long. The next morning, Emily found herself waiting for Rosa before anyone else arrived, her heart strangely restless as if it already knew that something different was about to unfold. And when Rosa entered the room carrying a small tray with fresh flowers and a smile that seemed to light up the dullness of the walls, Emily felt a quiet comfort that words could not describe, because Rosa did not rush to tidy or adjust things like the others. Instead, she set the flowers down and began speaking in a soft tone about how every flower bends toward the light even after the hardest storm. And though it sounded like a simple comment, Emily felt as if Rosa's words were not about flowers at all, but about something hidden and deeper. And without realizing it, she whispered, "Do you really think broken things can grow again?" Rosa looked at her for a long moment, her eyes warm yet filled with something Emily could not quite name, and answered, "I don't think it. Emily, I know it." And from that moment on, something inside Emily shifted, for she began waiting for Rosa's visits, not because of the chores or the care, but because Rosa spoke in ways that no one else ever had, words that carried both truth and hope. And as days turned into weeks, Rosa began involving Emily in little things that others never thought of, asking her to choose the colors of the flowers, to describe how the sunlight fell on her window, or to share her thoughts on the stories Rosa told. And though these seemed like small tasks, they made Emily feel part of the world instead of locked away from it. But the most surprising moment came one afternoon when Rosa asked Emily to close her eyes and imagine herself not in her chair but standing on her own 2 feet in a garden, the wind brushing against her face, her steps steady, and though Emily hesitated, she followed Rosa's gentle voice, and for the first time she allowed herself to picture what she had long buried in her heart. And when she opened her eyes, there were tears but also a strange new fire, as if a seed of belief had been planted, yet she kept this feeling hidden, afraid that speaking of it might break the fragile hope growing inside. Meanwhile, her father remained distant, attending dinners and meetings, though sometimes he passed by Emily's room and noticed her eyes shining in ways he had not seen since she was a child, but he was too consumed with his empire to ask why, unaware that Rosa was quietly becoming the bridge between his daughter's silence and the possibility of change. And the rest of the staff, though curious, could not explain why Emily seemed more awake, more alive, her gaze following Rosa with trust, and though none of them spoke openly, whispers began to move through the mansion like a quiet wind, wondering if this maid was different from the rest. But Emily did not care what they thought, because in her heart she knew that with Rosa, life felt less like a prison and more like a door waiting to be opened. And one evening, when the house grew still and shadows stretched long across her room, Rosa leaned close and said softly, "Emily, do you believe that sometimes the impossible is only waiting for someone brave enough to try?" And though Emily's lips trembled, she answered, "I want to," and that was enough, because Rosa placed her hand gently over Emily's and whispered, "Then one day you will." And in that quiet promise, unspoken yet powerful, Emily felt the world she had always dreamed of inching closer, though she did not yet know how or when, but she believed, for the first time, that her silent world might finally be ready to break open into something new and full of life. That evening, as the rain tapped softly against the tall windows of the mansion and the house grew silent except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock, Rosa entered Emily's room not with flowers or stories but with something in her eyes that felt different, a quiet determination mixed with calm courage, and Emily sensed it immediately, her heart racing without knowing why, because Rosa pulled a chair closer and sat facing her, leaning in as if about to reveal a secret the world had forgotten, and in a voice, low but steady, she said, "Emily, I want to show you something that people say is impossible, until they see it happen with their own eyes." And Emily, though nervous, nodded, unable to resist the trust that Rosa's presence always carried. And then Rosa did something unexpected. She knelt down on the carpet, placed her hand on the floor, and slowly rose, not with a grand gesture but with a grace that spoke of strength hidden inside ordinary movements, her body balanced, her steps deliberate, as if each one carried a silent message, and she turned to Emily and said, "Every step begins in the mind, long before the feet touch the ground." Then she took another step, slow and firm, her gaze locked on Emily's as if daring her to believe, and though Emily had watched countless people walk in and out of her room, this moment felt entirely different, for Rosa was not just walking, she was demonstrating, showing her that movement was not simply a physical act but a declaration of courage. And Emily's hands gripped her chair tightly, her chest rising as if the air itself had become too heavy, because for the first time she imagined that maybe, just maybe, the impossible might not be as distant as she had believed. And Rosa, noticing the tears forming in Emily's eyes, knelt back beside her and said, "Do you see? Walking is not only with the legs, it begins here," gently tapping Emily's heart. And then she placed her hand over Emily's and whispered, "I want you to try something, not tomorrow, not next year, but right now." And Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat, fear and hope colliding inside her like two storms, and she shook her head, whispering, I can't. But Rosa's voice remained calm, never forceful. "You don't have to walk a mile, Emily, you only have to believe that your body can listen to your heart again. Just one movement, just one attempt, that is all." And the room seemed to shrink around them, the air charged with suspense as Emily stared at her lifeless legs, the same legs she had cursed for years, the same ones she had believed betrayed her. And yet, under Rosa's steady gaze, she lifted her hand slowly, almost trembling, and touched her thigh as if to remind herself that it was still part of her. Then Rosa carefully placed both hands on Emily's arms and said, "I will not let you fall." And with that, she guided Emily forward, encouraging her to shift her weight just slightly. An action so small that others might dismiss it, but for Emily it felt like climbing a mountain, and as she leaned, she felt the faintest pull in her muscles, a spark that had been buried deep for so long, and her eyes widened in shock because she had felt something real. And Rosa smiled through her own tears, whispering, "That is it, Emily, that is the beginning." And though Emily collapsed back into her chair, her heart was pounding, with a fire she had never felt before, because she knew she had just touched the edge of the impossible, and for the first time in her life, she believed she might be able to cross it. And as the storm raged outside, the sound of thunder echoing like a drumbeat, Emily sat trembling, replaying the moment in her mind, her spirit trembling between disbelief and hope, while Rosa simply sat beside her, silent but radiant, knowing that tonight something had been awakened that would never go back to sleep. And though Emily could not yet stand, she felt that her life had just shifted, as if the impossible had leaned down to whisper in her ear, "I am closer than you think." The next morning came with a strange heaviness in the air, the kind of stillness that seemed to hold its breath, as if the house itself knew something important was about to happen. And Emily sat in her chair by the window, staring at the garden. Outside, her fingers tapping nervously against the wooden armrest, because her mind was still replaying the moment from the night before, when Rosa had shown her that impossible could bend if she dared to push, and though doubt still wrapped itself around her heart, there was a tiny flame inside her that would not go out. And when Rosa entered the room quietly, carrying a tray of breakfast, she immediately noticed the restless energy in Emily's eyes, and with a gentle smile she asked, "Are you thinking about it?" And Emily nodded slowly, her voice soft and uncertain. "I felt something last night. I really did. But what if it was just my imagination?" And Rosa set the tray aside, kneeling down so their eyes met, her hand warm on Emily's trembling fingers as she said, "Imagination is the first step, but yesterday you felt more than that, and today, we can try again, not to walk across the room, but to stand, even if only for a moment." And the words made Emily's heart pound so hard she thought Rosa could hear it, because the very thought of standing was both terrifying and thrilling. And as Rosa helped her out of her chair, every muscle in Emily's body screamed with fear, her legs stiff and foreign beneath her, and she whispered, I can't do this." But Rosa stayed calm, whispering back, "Yes, you can, and I will be right here. I won't let you fall." And Emily gripped Rosa's hands so tightly her knuckles turned white, her whole body shaking as she tried to shift her weight. And for a moment nothing happened except the echo of her shallow breathing. And then, slowly, with Rosa's steady encouragement, she felt her knees pushed downward against the floor, her body beginning to rise in a way she had never felt before. And her eyes widened in disbelief as her legs wobbled under her own weight, a shock that made her cry out, "Rosa, I'm doing it." And though her body shook like a leaf in the wind, she was standing, actually standing, for the first time in her life, tears streaming down her face as her hands clung to Rosa for balance. And Rosa whispered, "You see, Emily, your body remembers what your heart has always known." And though it lasted only a few seconds before Emily collapsed back into her chair, it was enough to make her world spin with wonder, because in those seconds the impossible had turned real. And as she sat there gasping, her face pale but glowing with joy, she whispered, "I stood, Rosa, I really stood." And Rosa hugged her tightly, whispering back, "Yes, and tomorrow, you will stand longer." And in that moment, Emily realized her life had changed forever. Because even if she still could not walk across the room, she now knew that the first step was no longer just a dream. And as the sun broke through the clouds and filled her room with light, Emily felt hope surge through her veins, stronger than ever before. And Rosa, though calm on the outside, silently wiped away her own tears, because she knew she had just witnessed a miracle in the making, one that was only beginning, and one that would carry Emily toward a future she had never dared to imagine. The house was unusually quiet the following morning, as though every wall, every piece of furniture, and even the air itself was waiting for something extraordinary to unfold. And Emily, sitting in her chair with her hands folded tightly in her lap, could feel her heart thudding louder than ever before, because today Rosa had promised her they would try again, not just standing, but something far more daring. Step, one single step, the kind of action she had dreamed about but never believed would belong to her. And though fear clawed at her mind, that spark of hope she had felt yesterday kept her from giving up. And when Rosa entered the room, her calm presence seemed to melt some of the tension, for she carried no tray of food, no distraction, only determination in her eyes as she said softly, "Today is the day. Emily, are you ready?" And Emily, though trembling, nodded, because deep down she wanted this more than anything. So Rosa gently pulled her up from the chair, steadying her as Emily's legs shook under her weight, her body trembling like a fragile branch in the wind. And every instinct inside Emily screamed to sit back down, to retreat to the safety of what she had always known. But Rosa's firm grip on her hands grounded her, her steady voice whispering, one breath at a time, "You are stronger than you believe." And Emily closed her eyes, inhaling slowly as her knees bent slightly, her toes pressing uncertainly against the carpet. And then Rosa guided her, shifting her balance, saying, "Don't think of walking across the room. Just think of lifting one foot, moving it forward, and placing it down again. That is all." And Emily, with sweat beading on her forehead, lifted her right foot shakily off the floor, her body swaying dangerously, her breath caught in her throat, until Rosa steadied her waist, whispering, "I've got you." And with all the courage she could summon, Emily moved her foot forward and lowered it down, the sound of her heel hitting the floor, echoing in her ears like a victory drum. And her eyes flew open, wide with shock and awe, as she gasped, "I did it. I stepped." Her voice breaking with emotion, and Rosa's eyes filled with tears as she smiled and whispered back, "Yes, Emily, you did, and now the world has changed for you." And though her legs were burning, though her arms ached from gripping Rosa for balance, Emily felt a rush of freedom she had never known. For in that single step she had broken the walls that had trapped her since birth. And when Rosa encouraged her to try again, she did. Slower this time, but steadier, each step feeling like a mountain conquered, and with every movement her body grew more alive, her spirit soaring higher, until at last she collapsed back into her chair, exhausted but glowing with triumph, whispering, "I am not the same anymore." And Rosa knelt beside her, brushing away her tears as she said, "No, Emily, you are free now, not because you can walk yet, but because you know you can." And Emily leaned back, closing her eyes, letting the weight of that truth sink deep into her soul, realizing that the world she had watched from windows and chairs was no longer untouchable, because now she had stepped into it, however small that step was. And in the silence that followed, as the sunlight streamed into the room and lit her face, Emily knew this was the beginning of a life she had never dared to dream, a life that belonged to her, not to her limits, not to her fears, but to her courage. And Rosa, watching her with pride, understood that this was more than a physical miracle, love, and endless possibility.